Give me a second to get set up here. So, share screen. Okay, can you guys see that? Good, okay. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out this morning to listen to this presentation. I'm getting a little bit of noise back from somebody. I don't know if you guys want to mute those. So I had a lot of questions in the last couple of months about this topic. Basically, what are commercial real estate brokers seeing out in the market? And this presentation is just meant to be a synopsis of what I've been seeing out there. So I'm going to start with a quote that will summarize sort of where I'm going. That is, if we've learned anything from the history of invention and discovery, it's that in the long run and often the short run, the most daring prophecies seem laughably conservative. The bottom line in the presentation will be that COVID has largely accelerated the process of change in many segments of the commercial real estate industry, but this change was already on its way. So for those of you who ever watched Shark Tank, you might hear them occasionally talk about Porter's five forces. So be things like barriers to entry, competitive rivalry, and so on. Michael Porter basically wrote the book on business strategy, and that's defined much of large corporate strategy over the last several decades. When people talk about disruptive innovation, they're typically talking about threat of new entrants or the threat of substitute. So innovation and disruption are accounted for in Porter's model, but an outside black swan or unaccountable is not really for in this model. Things like government legislation, disease such as COVID, wars, economic warfare, all of unexpected consequences for businesses that are operating in these environments. These are the major disruptive challenges facing businesses today. Commercial real estate and broader real estate in general. It's historically been a safe haven and a pretty secure place for the growth of equity. But we are not immune to the changes that we see in the market today. Both owners and occupiers have to learn to adapt to this new market to really navigate it successfully. So I included this graphic from Deloitte because it shows pretty effectively what the sentiment in our industry was at the start of the year. I have to say that I was pretty optimistic going into this year. I thought we would be shooting the lights out. So this definitely put a wrench in our plans. Industrial is one of the more stable asset classes here in Alberta. Of course, it's fluctuations in the price of oil, but there's been a growth recently in the demand for distribution space. And to a lesser degree, there's new industries such as cannabis that have helped to steady this asset class. This space does not necessarily mean that there will be more industrial jobs. However, a lot of the jobs are going to be replaced with automation, and that is a growing trend. Since COVID started, what we've been seeing in this asset class is national firms are starting to impose lower and lower caps on what their local branches are allowed to pay. They're also imposing shorter lease terms, which is something that we've seen in larger markets for a long time, and it's now starting to make its way here. And by short-term leases, I'm talking about leases that are 6 months or less. We've seen a lot of those recently in the industrial side. Okay, office space had issues before COVID started. COVID will definitely have a negative impact on this asset class. As an example, this graph shows the growth of flex office space between 2010 and 2019. For reference, what we're talking about when we talk about flex office space is places like WeWork, Regis, Work Nicer. These are places where you go in, you rent a single office or a boardroom for a few hours, and then you're done with that space. It's not something that confines you to the normal to normal leasing requirements. So as you can see in the graph, we went from minimal share space in 2010, where it's negligible presence, to in 2019, share space makes up half of all new office leases signed in the top 50 US markets. Um, Canada tends to trail the US by a couple of years in these metrics, but I guarantee you it's something that's growing here as well. So share space, since it makes up 50% of the new office leasing in the major markets, this is something that is going to be disrupted in a major way because of what's happening with COVID. A lot of these share space models have pretty razor thin margins, and they require a high percentage of occupancy in order for them to be profitable. So when you look at things like mandating physical distancing, and legislation around how close people can be together, it's going to have a major effect. Okay, another point, without being, I guess, overtly political, UCP government has not really been kind to the office sector in Alberta. Cuts to the public sector and medical. We're already seeing doctors moving to cheaper spaces. I'm working with one right now who's making that exact move. And many of them are looking to leave the province where they can make more money. The cuts that the province is making to medical practitioners is substantial. And we're already seeing a little bit of brain drain to other provinces. I would say an increase in telemedicine is also going to have long-term impacts on the space. It's probably not going to be a huge impact, but as telemedicine and teleconsulting, like we've seen, takes off, I don't think that this will ever return to pre-COVID levels. This is something really be excited for what's happening. So retail is a bit of a sad story. Retail, as we know it, is well over 100 years old. Interior shopping was 60 or 70 years. It was really it was about time for a change. COVID will be a coup de grace for a lot of these retailers. We're already seeing more and more big brands closing their doors. One thing to consider with COVID too, and another way it's going to disrupt retail, is that the elderly in the past have been pretty supportive of traditional retail. They've been slow to change over to Amazon and online markets. But one thing that I've been hearing, at least anecdotally, is that a lot of older people now are, they figured out Amazon. They figured out it's awesome. You can see what the ratings are, get information about the products. You can shop around without leaving your home. So a lot of people who would traditionally be in that shopping in traditional retail places are now shopping online. So when these restrictions on distance are lifted, the question will be whether these people go back to traditional shopping. The answer here is that some will, and some definitely will continue to shop online. So the major question in this segment is, what do you do with all of this retail space? Some retailers will be fine. Hair salons, liquor stores, art galleries, restaurants, bars, entertainment use, anything that falls under the category of experiential retail will continue to exist. And that's because it's a novelty, and it seems to be sort of in alignment with nature. With that said, some entertainment concepts will be in major trouble. I would say Cineplex and Rec Room are a couple that are probably going to see major disruption. And that is because they don't have major competitors in the marketplace anymore. The issue is that it's not a competitor that is going to destroy their business. It's going to be a different choice. It's going to be things like virtual reality, home gaming systems, home theaters. These things will probably cause these businesses to really suffer, I think, in the short to midterm. So again, what happens to all of this retail space? That is a good question, and I think whoever answers it probably make a lot of money. One of the things I think you'll see happening is that some office users who would have a marginal benefit by being in retail space will probably start to migrate to those spaces. So what I mean by that is, as an example, if you have a tax accountant who is doing a lot of B2C tax season, they will get some benefit from being in a high exposure location where they can get walk by traffic. So I think one of the things you'll see is that office users or people that were traditionally office users will start migrating to retail as those prices decline. The place where you're going to see the most impact in retail is big box, which we're already seeing. The Bay announced, I think last week, that it's going to be shutting its downtown location. I know Staples has indicated that it has an intent to close roughly half of its stores. It's moving to a B2B model rather than B2C, which it's traditionally done. I would say things like Sears are really yesterday's news, but when we really feel the impact of in the sector is when you start seeing Walmart and major retailers like that start closing locations. Hospitality. So hotels were actually doing really well prior to COVID. 2019 was a record year in Canada for hotel asset sales. And this is in spite of the fact that Airbnb is considered to be majorly disruptive to the sector. Airbnb basically democratized hotel ownership and put every single person with a building in competition with hotels. So chances are there will be long-term disruption of this sector. I'd say things like Hilton and Marriott will be fine. And then probably your roadside, dimly lit motel is going to be fine as well. It's going to be the vendors in the middle that will really be hurt by Airbnb in the long run. It'll be interesting to see how that shakes out, but for now, it's COVID is having a short-term impact on the sector, but I believe it will probably bounce back following the lifting of those restrictions. Restaurants, I think, will continue to see a high turnover. It's going to be much the same as it was before COVID. As soon as they lift these restrictions in the short term, you're going to see some businesses close their doors. Right now, the ones that are hardest hit are going to be your self-serve or buffet restaurants. They're still mandated to be closed. You can't open a buffet right now. So multifamily. Multifamily continues to be the safest or among the safest investments in the commercial realm. Despite anything that goes on, people still need a place to live, especially in northern Canada. You need a roof over your head. So multifamily will continue to go on and be strong. Multifamily also tends to be a little bit counter-cyclical. As people end up in financial distress, some of them may lose their homes, and as that happens, they'll move into rentals. So multifamily is generally a safe investment in all markets. There's an exception to this, though, I would say, and that would be people who own multifamily student housing. My guess is that student housing will probably never go back to pre-COVID levels. Leases are generally signed September to September. We've seen people walk away from those leases, and the landlords can definitely chase them, but it's going to be labor intensive since so many people are walking on these leases right now. It's going to be a real headache for a lot of those owners. So I think student housing is really going to be hit hard by this. And this brings me to the final sector of real estate that I don't think will ever be the same. I don't generally talk about because it's not really in our wheelhouse as much. And that is your institutional educational real estate. I think for a lot of colleges and universities, they were already being pushed towards a more flexible model of more mature learners who want to learn on their own time. I think because of COVID, this will accelerate this process, and you're going to see this accelerate dramatically. College and university very expensive, and I think there's going to be a point where people begin to realize more and more that a generalized arts degree is not really necessary or helpful to a lot of people in life. And I love learning. I love being in a classroom, but the practicalities of the system today really make it a dinosaur, and as such, it's prime for disruption. So I'd say even high schools can be disrupted by things like Khan Academy, open courseware, more and more things that we're seeing today. As an example of this, a number of years ago, I took a number of courses on communications, on philosophy and rhetoric from UC Berkeley. I don't get any credentials for them. I don't pay anything for them. They're free courses. But basically with this open courseware, it allows people to attend academic institutions and listen to some of the best professors in the world. Alternatively, I could have paid $20,000 or $30,000 a year to attend a subpar academic institution. So the real question is what's going to be more sustainable in the long run? Are people going to attend these open classrooms where you can listen to some of the best professors in the field? Or are you going to pay money to go to something that is of lower quality? So where are the opportunities in all of this? I think there's an opportunity for a lot of people to tap into some of these things that we're seeing. I'd say share space for one isn't going away. It's moved into more places like hair salons, art studios, professional offices, and shared kitchens. I would say it's probably, you're going to see it in other areas such as what we see in the States is co-living spaces, shared car ownership, and I think even things like schools could be disrupted by a share space of some sort. The key to retail will be for retailers to make their plazas a destination. I think what constitutes an anchor tenant will probably shift from a grocery store to something that's more experiential. I think even something like green space in an urban area, maybe more of an anchor in the future than a grocery store. I think the retail landscape is really going to change dramatically. In office, I think you're likely to see a pretty massive contraction over the next few years. As this happens, you might see more conversions from office to multifamily, which we've seen in the past. But these projects are very expensive and very risky for the people that do them. So I don't really know that I see a lot of that happening. To give you an idea of what kind of office deals are happening downtown right now, you can do op cost only head leases downtown, meaning you can take some space for $0 net. And sometimes landlords are offering them for below op cost, which I've seen. So how do you value these buildings when they're generating no revenue? Industrial will be fine. I think in the long run, it's going to be a good bet. Multifamily will continue to be a strong performer. Stay away from student housing, and in education, I think there's going to be push demand for online cheaper alternatives. A lot of those things, and that is going to leave a lot of vacancy in those spaces. So in conclusion, my conclusion is change is a fact of life. COVID will accelerate some of the change, be disruptive to the commercial real estate market. But the reality is that this change is going to happen anyway, and people will be forced to adapt to the new normal, will be pushed out of business altogether. And I think that really the consequence of COVID is going to be to accelerate a lot of this change that we're seeing. And the final question I'll leave you guys with is how do we live and how do you do business in the brave new world? So that's my presentation. Any questions?
Hey, Tom, I got a question.
Yeah.
What do you see happening with properties? You've got this proposal that a lot of these businesses will fail because of COVID, which is going to mean a lot of commercial vacancies. I can understand the residential position, and that makes perfect sense. But with the commercial ones, these properties have millions of dollars in mortgages. They have coming up potentially huge vacancies and future tenancies that aren't going to be sufficient to cover those mortgage. So we're going to see a lot of commercial foreclosures, are you thinking, or are we going to just see a lot of vacant properties, a lot of abandonments? What do you see forthcoming with commercial properties?
I'd say it's hard to predict what the banks will do to adjust for that. I would say if they don't do anything, you're probably going to see a lot of foreclosures start in probably 6 to 12 month time horizon. There are potentially opportunities there for buyers who are pretty bullish, but to me, it really depends on what the banks do for these property owners. As far as, do we relax? Do we extend mortgages? It's really anybody's guess, but I think the major factor is going to be can these guys service their debt? What does that look like? And what sort of relief, if any, are the banks going to offer? So at this point, I'd say it's really hard to answer that question.
Yeah, well, the other side, the flip coin of the banks are was the city itself. I don't know what taxes are like out in St. Albert or Sherwood Park or anything like that, but I've got a client who's down on White Avenue, and he's got to up his rents, and he can't actually up his rents because with the property taxes being what they are, the property taxes have literally doubled in the last 5 years. So the property taxes for right on White Avenue, they're over $30 a foot.
Yeah.
His tenants are going to go bankrupt. They can barely afford $30 a foot in overall rent, let alone just paying the property taxes. So I don't know. I'm very disappointed with the whole thing right now. And COVID's one thing, and it's really destabilized the market. I've seen a lot of businesses shutting down a lot, and it's picking up. I got to say, it is picking up. But I've seen a lot of really strong hardship going on over the past 3 months, almost 4 months now. It's hard to believe. But also, just from the point of view of commercial renewals, I'm getting all kinds of landlords contacting me saying, look, I've got a rent renewal coming up in a year. I know there's going to be issues. I want to keep my tenant, but what am I going to do? And then he shows me his property tax roll. He shows me his mortgage payments. I don't see how you can do it.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a serious problem for a lot of people. And you're right too about the taxes. Like there's like when taxes are accounting for, in the industrial areas, it's like it can be $2 or $3 a foot, right? That's like the lowest of what you'll see in the city. But you're right. When you start looking at retail or nicer office space, you're paying 10, 15, $20 a foot in property tax. And when you start considering that, how do these guys maintain these buildings, right? Like you can do a $20 gross lease in downtown Edmonton right now. Like you can't even service your expenses, much less your debt. So it's going to be a major problem, I think, for a lot of people. And without some sort of assistance or program from the banks, I think there's going to be a lot of foreclosures in the coming year.
So just one further related question then. It's a typical opportunity situation. If there's a lot of foreclosures, do you see any viable option for, if a property is sold somewhat underwater at a significantly reduced value, to put in tenancies that might become viable for a new landlord, or is that just out the window because nobody's going to be renting?
Yeah, no, the way to do it would be you have to have the tenant first, and basically we'd be shopping around for space to buy with the tenant, and then you would buy it and lease it to them. Some guys do that. I'm doing a deal like that right now with a distressed property where a guy has a tenant. This property has substantial vacancy, so he's basically stealing it, and then he's going to put his guy in, and he's going to be able to service his debt. He'll be fine. So I think guys who adopt that strategy, they'll be okay. I would say buying a vacant building with no tenant, in your pocket that is a risky proposition for sure. Any other questions?
Tom, I was going to ask you about, you mentioned showing market caps for Airbnb and the major hotel chains. So do you think that's fairly reflective of actual sales type of thing?
I don't, because a lot of times Airbnb would be considered a tech company, and as such, when you look at how businesses are valuated, tech companies they'll trade at a higher multiple and generally of their gross revenue, whereas something like the Hilton will trade at a lower multiple of their net revenue. So a lot of Airbnb valuation is pure speculation. Where that comes from, but I mean, I'm not an expert in that.
Yeah, that would be my thought too. But at least it's an interesting stat. But yeah, so I'm guessing you didn't find any stats on, like you're saying, gross revenues for those places. But
I didn't.
Regardless, no, that's great.
As an addition to that, Brian, I've been working with a number of smaller investor clients as of late, trying to unwind Airbnb investments and convert them into either long-term rentals or into just to sell them outright. And so I would expect that that Airbnb's valuation is probably going to take a bit of a hit from this, pretty significant, based on the fact that they're just going to be losing users. They're going to be losing not just users, sorry, but the actual supply that they had before is going to be significantly constrained as people convert and find ways to maintain the servicing of their debts that they currently have on those properties.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know some of the mutual fund managers have trimmed lots of their hospitality. I'm guessing Airbnb was one, but booking was definitely one, and some of the hotel chains are positions they've trimmed since kind of the COVID thing got started, right? So they're, that's their take on the situation too. But yeah, that was interesting. And remember you mentioned that last week about the Vancouver Airbnb market was getting pretty nasty for the small investors. So
there's a funny article last week that came out of Toronto, and it was somebody that had a Airbnb Blue Mountain, and they were complaining about how they used to get $11,000 a month income out of it, and now they could barely get $2,000, and that's just not worth it. And it's just, it was a very sympathetic article, but it's hard, like when you hear that sort of stuff, you're like, well, this isn't a business owner that was doing very well and now has to pivot, is essentially what it is. So I think to Tom's comment in his presentation, this is going to be where people find the opportunity that still exist. Those are going to be the ones that will make the money now.
Right.
There's been a shift.
Yeah.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a 10-second, I mean, it's, pardon my ignorance, but do you have a 10-second explanation of what the market capitalization, what is that?
It's just the value of the company.
How it's valued? Okay.
The value of the stock, probably more or less the value of the stock times the number of shares held. So
Okay.
for publicly traded companies. So
Right.
Okay. All right, guys. That's it. We're out of time anyway. So yeah, thanks for everyone for coming. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.